Have you ever felt like the weight of the world is on your shoulders? Like no matter what you do, nothing seems under control? What if I told you that God already has it covered, that your anxiety, your fears, your future, they are all in His hands? Today, we're going to learn how to stop worrying because God's got it. Worry is one of the most common struggles people face, and yet it is one of the most misunderstood. Most of us experience worry in our daily lives. It creeps in first thing in the morning when we wake up and instantly start thinking about all the things that could go wrong. It shows up during work when deadlines loom and responsibilities pile up. It shows up at night when we lie in bed and our minds replay the problems of the day, amplifying them. But here's the critical truth. Worry is not just a harmless habit or a minor inconvenience. Worry is a spiritual and emotional problem. It is a signal that we are attempting to carry burdens that were never meant for us to carry alone. And understanding this difference between worry and faith is the first step toward living in freedom and peace. Worry is fundamentally about control. When we worry, what we are really saying is, I cannot trust God to handle this. I have to do it myself. It is the human response to the unknown, the uncomfortable, the uncontrollable. When you're lying awake, worrying about your finances, your health, your marriage, your children, what you are actually wrestling with is the illusion that you are responsible for controlling the outcome of these situations. You are attempting to do the job of God, to manage life on your own, and to ensure that everything turns out exactly the way you want it to. And this is exhausting because it is impossible. Life is unpredictable. People are unpredictable. Circumstances are unpredictable. And when we try to control the uncontrollable, worry is the inevitable result. Faith, on the other hand, is the opposite of worry. Faith is saying, I cannot control everything, but I can trust the one who can. Faith is not a feeling, it is a choice. It is a decision to believe in the reliability, the wisdom, and the love of God, even when life is uncertain. Faith does not ignore the reality of difficulties or pretend that problems do not exist. Faith recognizes the storm, but it refuses to be paralyzed by it. Faith steps forward in confidence because it is grounded in the character of God, not the conditions of life. This is the distinction that makes all the difference. Worry says, I must do this alone. Faith says, God has this and I will trust Him. Think about Jesus' words in Matthew 6:25-34. He doesn't say, try not to worry and you might succeed. He doesn't offer vague encouragement. He says, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Here, Jesus is addressing the root of worry, an overemphasis on what we can see, touch, and control. Worry is always about the present and the future, always about what we do not yet have or cannot yet predict. Faith, however, lifts our eyes above the immediate and places our trust in God, who is fully aware of both the present and the future. Understanding worry versus faith also requires recognizing the emotional and spiritual cost of worry. Worry is heavy. It weighs on your heart, your mind, and even your body. Chronic worry can lead to sleepless nights, fatigue, irritability, and even physical ailments. Spiritually, worry creates distance between you and God because it is a subtle way of saying, I don't believe you are enough to handle this. Faith, however, lightens the load. Faith frees us from the paralysis of fear. Faith allows us to experience God's peace in the middle of uncertainty. It enables us to act with courage because we are not driven by fear, but by trust. One of the practical ways to cultivate faith over worry is to shift your focus from what you cannot control to what you can trust. Instead of running through all the potential negative outcomes in your mind, remind yourself of God's promises and past faithfulness. Reflect on moments in your life when God came through, even when you did not see the solution. Keep a journal of answered prayers and let those entries serve as evidence that God is trustworthy. Another powerful practice is to verbalize your trust. Say aloud, God, I cannot control this, but I know you can. Speaking your faith is an act of resistance against worry. It is also important to understand that faith is not passive. Faith does not mean sitting back and doing nothing while hoping for the best. Faith is active trust. It involves taking steps forward, even when the outcome is uncertain. It involves making wise decisions, seeking counsel, and acting responsibly, but always with the underlying confidence that God is in control. When worry creeps in, you acknowledge it but refuse to hand over authority to it. You consciously choose to surrender that anxiety to God and step forward in trust, knowing He has the bigger picture. Another way to grasp the difference between worry and faith is to consider perspective. Worry has a narrow perspective. It focuses on today, on the immediate problem, and on what might go wrong. Faith has a broad perspective. It sees life in the context of eternity, in the context of God's plan, and in the context of His unchanging character. When you are facing a challenge, worry fixates on the obstacle. Faith focuses on the one who is greater than the obstacle. This shift in perspective is transformative because it changes how you respond to life's uncertainties. Worry is often rooted in pride, the belief that you alone must solve the problem. Faith is rooted in humility, the recognition that God is bigger than any challenge you face. Worry wants to manipulate, control, and predict. Faith wants to trust, release, and rest. Understanding this difference is the key to breaking the cycle of anxiety and stepping into a life of peace and freedom. The moment you recognize that worry is an attempt to do God's job, you can start to let go and start to trust. And once you make that choice, you begin to experience the relief, the calm, and the joy that comes from knowing that God is in control, that He is faithful, and that you do not have to carry the weight of the world on your own. One of the biggest reasons we struggle with worry is that we forget who is truly in control. We see problems, emergencies, and uncertainties, and our first instinct is to try to manage them ourselves. But the truth is, God is sovereign over every situation. He is not caught off guard by the curveballs of life, the sudden crises, or the unexpected turns. Nothing in your life is outside of His knowledge or His plan. And when we truly understand this, it changes everything. Sovereignty means that God is in ultimate authority, that He is fully aware of all circumstances, and that He has the power to intervene in any situation at any time. This is not a distant or abstract idea. It is deeply practical and deeply personal. When you are worried about your job, your finances, your health, or your relationships, God is fully aware. He sees what you cannot see. He knows what you cannot know. And He has a plan, even when the path seems unclear. Think about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel did not know how he would be saved. He did not know whether the lions would close their jaws on him or if he would survive the night. Yet Daniel trusted God because he understood that God was sovereign. God was in control of the lions, the king, and the entire situation. Daniel's peace was rooted not in what he could control, but in who controlled the situation. And when God intervened, the outcome reflected His authority and His power. This is the same God who is watching over you today. Another example is Jesus calming the storm in Mark 4. The disciples were terrified because the wind and waves were out of control, but Jesus reminded them that even the storm obeys Him. The same power that commands nature is at work in your life. Worry often makes us feel small, like the problems we face are too big for God to handle. But that is a lie. Nothing is too big, too messy, or too complicated for Him. When you start to internalize the sovereignty of God, worry begins to lose its grip. God's sovereignty does not mean life will always be easy, nor does it mean that everything will happen exactly the way you want it to happen. That is a misconception many of us carry. Instead, it means that every circumstance, even the difficult ones, is under His authority and can be used for His purposes. Romans 8:28 tells us that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even when life feels chaotic, even when you do not understand the reasons, God is still working. His plan is bigger than your current worry, bigger than your limited vision, and bigger than the mistakes you think cannot be fixed. The sovereignty of God is also deeply comforting because it reminds us that we are not alone. When you face challenges, you are not struggling against a universe that is random or against circumstances that are out of control. You are not on your own. God is actively involved. He is watching over you. He knows every detail, and He is capable of turning every situation around. Worry often comes from the illusion that you must carry the burden alone. Recognizing God's sovereignty frees you from that illusion. Living in the reality of God's sovereignty requires a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on the chaos, we focus on the commander of the chaos. Instead of feeling trapped by circumstances, we remember that God is bigger than every problem, bigger than every obstacle, and bigger than every fear. This perspective allows us to act with courage and confidence. It enables us to pray with boldness, to step forward in faith, and to let go of the fear that often drives worry. Sovereignty also calls for trust, not control. Trusting God's sovereignty means that you do not have to manipulate, force, or control outcomes. It means that you can hand over the situation to God and rest in His wisdom. You might not see the full picture. You might not understand why things happen the way they do, but God does, and that is enough. It is enough to calm your heart, to steady your mind, and to silence the voice of worry that tries to convince you that you are on your own. Faith and action go hand in hand with recognizing God's sovereignty. You are called to live wisely, make responsible choices, and do your part. But you do not have to carry the weight of the outcome. God is in control of the results, and He can work in ways you cannot imagine. Even when situations look bleak or hopeless, God's sovereignty means that hope is never lost. He can redeem, restore, and intervene at any moment. Your job is to trust Him, not to control Him. When we fully grasp that God is sovereign over every situation, worry begins to lose its grip. Anxiety loses its power because the one who holds the universe also holds your life. You begin to experience peace that is not dependent on circumstances. You begin to walk with confidence, knowing that God is fully aware, fully able, and fully loving. Every challenge, every uncertainty, every fear is an opportunity to exercise faith in the one who is bigger than anything we face. Worry is not just a minor inconvenience or a harmless habit. It carries a cost that affects your mind, your body, your emotions, and even your relationship with God. Many people underestimate the impact of worry because it doesn't always appear to have immediate consequences. But over time, its effects are profound. Worry is like a slow leak in a tire. It may not burst immediately, but it will eventually leave you stranded, exhausted, and unable to move forward. Understanding the cost of worry is crucial because it motivates us to take our anxiety seriously and, more importantly, to replace it with faith. Physically, worry is exhausting. Your body was not designed to carry the weight of constant fear, doubt, and stress. When you worry, your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your mind races, and your energy is drained. Over time, chronic worry can contribute to serious health issues like high blood pressure, insomnia, headaches, and weakened immunity. You may feel like you are doing something productive when you worry, analyzing scenarios, planning for worst-case situations, but in reality, worry is consuming energy that could be invested in meaningful action or in simply resting in God's care. Emotionally, worry is crippling. It robs you of joy, peace, and contentment. When your mind is constantly preoccupied with what could go wrong, it's difficult to experience gratitude for what is going right. Worry magnifies problems and diminishes blessings. Every situation seems more overwhelming, every challenge more insurmountable, and every decision more fraught. Craig often points out that worry is a thief. It steals the present moment, leaving you trapped in fear of the future. It creates a mindset where anxiety dictates your perception of reality, even when things may not be as dire as your mind believes. Spiritually, worry is a trust issue. When you worry, you're essentially saying, God, I don't believe you can handle this. I must take charge. Worry is rooted in pride and self-reliance. It assumes that your understanding, your ability, and your control are greater than God's wisdom, power, and love. In doing so, worry creates distance between you and God. It prevents you from experiencing His peace because you are trying to manage outcomes instead of surrendering them. Matthew 6:27 says, "Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life?" The answer is no. Worry accomplishes nothing for you spiritually, and yet it undermines your ability to fully trust God. The cost of worry extends beyond you as an individual. It affects your relationships, your work, and your decisions. When you are consumed by worry, it is hard to be fully present for others. Anxiety can make you irritable, impatient, or distracted, and this impacts how you interact with your family, friends, and colleagues. Decisions made out of worry often lead to mistakes, missed opportunities, or actions driven by fear rather than faith. Worry limits your vision and narrows your perspective, preventing you from seeing the possibilities that God is orchestrating behind the scenes. Craig often emphasizes that worry is a form of self-burdening. You are attempting to carry a load that was never meant for you to bear alone. God invites us to cast our burdens on Him, but worry is the refusal to do so. It is a silent rebellion against the truth that God is big enough, strong enough, and wise enough to handle what concerns us most. When you choose worry, you are choosing to carry something that is not yours to carry, and the cost is significant. The more we allow worry to dominate our thoughts, the more weight we carry unnecessarily, and the less energy we have to focus on faith and action. Another cost of worry is the limitation it places on your spiritual growth. Anxiety keeps you focused on the problem rather than on God, and it can stunt your faith. When you constantly rehearse worst-case scenarios, you train your mind to focus on fear instead of trust. You miss opportunities to witness God's provision, to experience His guidance, and to grow in confidence in His character. Worry constrains your spiritual vision, making it difficult to see how God might be working all things together for your good. Finally, worry robs you of peace. The peace of God is described in Philippians 4:7 as a peace that surpasses all understanding. It is a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that is available even in the middle of storms, but worry crowds out that peace. It convinces you that your problems are bigger than God's power, and it convinces you that you must solve everything on your own. The cost of worry is the forfeiture of this divine peace, and it is perhaps the most significant loss of all. Peace is not just a feeling, it is the natural result of trusting God. When worry dominates your life, peace cannot dwell there. Recognizing the cost of worry is the first step in choosing faith instead. When you understand the toll it takes on your body, mind, emotions, relationships, and spirit, you realize that worry is not a harmless habit, but a serious problem that must be addressed. The good news is that God provides an alternative, faith. Faith allows you to transfer the weight of worry from your shoulders to God's, to experience His peace and to live in freedom. It reminds you that you were never meant to carry life's burdens alone, and that you can trust the one who is fully capable of managing every situation you face. Understanding that worry is harmful and recognizing God's sovereignty over our lives is powerful, but knowing something intellectually is not enough. Faith becomes real when it is applied. One of the most important aspects of overcoming worry is learning practical steps to hand over your anxiety to God. This is where faith meets action, where belief transforms into daily habits, and where peace starts to replace fear. Craig Groeschel often emphasizes that trusting God is not passive, it is intentional, proactive, and concrete. You don't simply tell yourself to trust God and hope that worry disappears. You take deliberate steps that align your mind, heart, and actions with God's truth. The first step is acknowledgement. You cannot hand over anxiety if you are unwilling to admit that you are carrying it. Most of us try to act strong, like we have everything under control, when inside we are secretly overwhelmed. Being honest with yourself and with God is critical. Say, God, I am worried. I am afraid. I don't know what to do. This act of honesty is not weakness. It is the first step toward freedom. When you acknowledge worry, you stop hiding from it and start confronting it with faith. The second step is prayer. Prayer is the direct line to God, and it is the most powerful tool we have to hand over our anxieties. Philippians 4, 6-7 instructs us to not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Prayer is not just a routine or a ritual, it is an act of surrender. It is saying, God, I cannot handle this on my own. I am giving it to you. Effective prayer is specific. Don't just say, please help me. Bring your exact fears, situations, and uncertainties before God. Talk to him as a loving father who understands you completely and who is fully capable of handling what concerns you. The third step is meditating on God's promises. The mind is powerful, and what you focus on will shape your emotions and your actions. Worry thrives on negative assumptions, imagining the worst case scenario and replaying past failures. To counter this, fill your mind with God's truth. Memorize verses like Isaiah 4:1-10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. When anxiety creeps in, repeat these promises aloud. Let them sink into your heart. Meditation on God's word shifts your perspective from fear to trust and transforms worry into confidence. Another step is journaling your concerns. Writing down your fears can make them tangible, and then writing a prayer of surrender alongside them allows you to hand over those worries to God in a visible, concrete way. Journaling is a practice that helps you see progress over time. You can look back and reflect on answered prayers and moments where God intervened, reinforcing your faith that he is capable and faithful. Taking small steps of obedience is another practical approach. Often worry paralyzes us because we feel powerless to act. Faith, however, is action-oriented. Even when the outcome is uncertain, taking steps forward, sending that email, making that phone call, having that difficult conversation demonstrates that you trust God to handle what you cannot. Obedience in small things builds confidence in God's faithfulness and reduces the grip of anxiety. It is also important to practice gratitude. Worry focuses on what is missing or what might go wrong, while gratitude focuses on what is present and what is already given. Make a daily habit of listing things you are thankful for. Gratitude reminds you that God is already at work in your life and that his goodness is present even in the midst of uncertainty. This simple practice can rewire your mind to look for evidence of God's care rather than dwelling on fears. Finally, surround yourself with supportive, faith-filled people. Community plays a huge role in managing anxiety. Share your struggles with someone who can pray with you, encourage you, and remind you of God's promises when your mind is clouded with fear. Isolation often amplifies worry, while connection and accountability strengthen faith. Craig Groeschel often emphasizes that these practical steps are not about eliminating problems. You will still face challenges, disappointments, and unexpected events. The difference is that when you take these steps, acknowledgement, prayer, meditating on God's promises, journaling, obedience, gratitude, and community, you are actively placing your concerns into God's hands. You are moving from passive anxiety to active trust, from fear-driven living to faith-driven living. You are learning to hand over the very weight that once crushed your heart, knowing that God is fully capable of carrying it for you, peace. It's a word we often hear in church, in books, and in inspirational messages, but how many of us truly experience it? And how many of us mistake the absence of problems for peace? Craig Groeschel often points out that God's peace is not the absence of trouble, it is the presence of God in the midst of trouble. Understanding this distinction is vital. Living in God's peace means that even when circumstances are chaotic, confusing, or frightening, your soul can rest because it trusts in God's power, love, and wisdom. Peace begins with perspective. When worry consumes us, we focus solely on what is going wrong or what could go wrong. Our eyes are fixed on the storm rather than on the one who can calm the storm. Living in God's peace requires us to lift our gaze from our circumstances and focus on God's presence. It's a conscious choice. It doesn't come automatically. It's saying, I see the storm, I acknowledge it, but I am not going to let it define me because God is bigger than my situation. Philippians 4:7 tells us that God's peace surpasses all understanding, a peace that the world cannot give and the mind cannot manufacture. It is supernatural and it is available to anyone willing to trust Him. One of the keys to living in peace is remembering God's faithfulness. Think back to the times in your life when God provided, protected, or guided you, even when the outcome seemed impossible. Those experiences are not coincidences. They are evidence of God's ongoing care and sovereignty. The more we meditate on His past faithfulness, the more we strengthen our confidence in His present and future provision. Craig often reminds us that when you train your mind to remember God's goodness, worry loses its power because faith begins to overshadow fear. Another critical element is learning to respond, not react. Worry often leads to reactive behavior, impulsive decisions, harsh words, or avoidance. Peace, on the other hand, produces thoughtful, deliberate responses grounded in trust. Living in God's peace allows you to pause, breathe, and seek His guidance before acting. It gives clarity in chaos and steadiness when the world feels unsteady. This is why cultivating peace is not only an internal process, but also a practical one, influencing how we interact with others and make decisions in everyday life. Prayer plays a significant role in accessing God's peace. Philippians 4:6 instructs us to present our request to God with thanksgiving. Prayer is not only about asking for solutions, it is about surrendering control, acknowledging God's authority, and inviting His presence into the situation. When we bring our concerns to Him and let go of the illusion that we are in charge, peace begins to replace anxiety. This is a deliberate act of faith, a choice to trust that God is already at work, even when we cannot see the results. Living in peace also involves aligning our minds with God's truth. Worry thrives on imagination and worst-case scenarios. Peace thrives on truth. Meditating on Scripture, speaking God's promises aloud, and focusing on His character shifts our perspective from fear to confidence. When anxiety tries to dominate our thoughts, we counter it by reminding ourselves of God's presence, power, and plan. The more consistently we do this, the more our minds are trained to dwell in peace rather than panic. Community plays a role in sustaining peace as well. Surrounding yourself with people who encourage your faith, pray with you, and remind you of God's promises helps reinforce peace in your life. Isolation can amplify fear, while support and accountability provide reinforcement for living in God's trust rather than human anxiety. Craig often emphasizes that peace is not just personal, it is relational. How we interact with others, how we encourage one another, and how we share God's presence contributes to maintaining peace in our lives and communities. Importantly, living in God's peace does not mean you will never face fear, difficulty, or uncertainty. Life will still have its storms, but peace is the assurance that God is with you in those storms. It is the confidence that He is bigger than the problem, wiser than any plan you could devise, and faithful to work all things for good. It is not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in relationship. This is the kind of peace that guards your heart, steadies your mind, and enables you to keep moving forward when worry would otherwise paralyze you. Craig Groeschel often encourages people to embrace peace actively. It is not passive resignation, but a daily choice to release control and place trust in God. Every moment of anxiety offers an opportunity to practice this choice, to pause, pray, reflect on Scripture, and remember God's faithfulness. Over time, these small acts of trust compound, transforming a life once dominated by worry into a life marked by deep, sustaining peace that truly surpasses understanding. Faith is not just an idea or a feeling. It is a choice that is expressed through action. Craig Groeschel often emphasizes that faith without action is incomplete, and worry thrives when action is stalled by fear. One of the most powerful ways to combat anxiety is to step forward in obedience even when the outcome is uncertain. Obedience in the face of fear is a tangible demonstration that you trust God, and it is one of the most effective ways to replace worry with confidence. Many people think they need to feel fearless before they act, but that is a misconception. Fear is not the enemy. It is what you do with fear that matters. Obedience does not eliminate fear. It moves you forward despite it. Take Peter walking on water as an example. He saw Jesus calling him from the boat and he stepped out onto the water. At first, he walked in faith, but the moment he focused on the storm around him, fear took over and he began to sink. Yet the act of stepping out, even briefly, demonstrated faith. Craig often points out that God rewards small steps of courage, and every time you obey despite fear, you strengthen your trust muscle. Faith in action starts with discernment. You need to know God's will for the next step. Sometimes this comes through scripture, sometimes through wise counsel, and sometimes through the prompting of the Holy Spirit. Discernment is about aligning your decisions with God's truth. When you know you are acting in alignment with God's purposes, obedience becomes easier because it is not based on personal strength or understanding, but on confidence in God's guidance. Worry loses its power when your actions are grounded in divine direction rather than human anxiety. Another aspect of faith in action is small, consistent steps. You don't have to move mountains overnight. Often, fear paralyzes people because they focus on the entire journey rather than the next step. Craig Groeschel emphasizes that faith grows through incremental obedience, doing the next right thing, speaking the next encouraging word, making the next decision in alignment with God's truth. These actions compound over time. Each step of faith strengthens your confidence in God's faithfulness and weakens the grip of worry. Obedience despite fear also involves letting go of the need for control. Fear often arises from the illusion that you can control outcomes. You think, if I do this, it must succeed, or if I take this step, I have to ensure it works. Faith in action releases that burden. You do what God calls you to do, but you leave the results in His hands. This act of surrender is profoundly liberating. It shifts your energy from controlling what you cannot to trusting in the one who can, and it diminishes anxiety because you are no longer carrying the weight of the outcome alone. Faith in action also produces courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. Every time you obey God, when fear tempts you to retreat, your courage grows. You begin to experience what Craig often calls faith momentum, a compounding effect where one act of faith builds confidence for the next. Over time, your natural response to fear shifts from hesitation to obedience. Worry loses its authority because your heart and mind are trained to move forward in trust, even when the path is unclear. It is also important to embrace failure as part of faith. Obedience does not guarantee perfect outcomes. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, things will not go as planned. But faith is not dependent on success. It is dependent on trust. Each step of obedience, even when it leads to setbacks, demonstrates your willingness to rely on God. Craig emphasizes that God often uses the outcomes we perceive as failures to teach, refine, and redirect us toward His ultimate purposes. The act of obedience itself, regardless of the immediate result, strengthens faith and diminishes worry. Practical faith in action can take many forms: having a difficult conversation, stepping into a new career, forgiving someone who hurt you, speaking a truth you have been avoiding, or sharing God's message with someone despite fear. Each act of obedience, no matter how small, sends a message to your heart that God is trustworthy and that He can be relied upon in every circumstance. The more you practice obedience despite fear, the less room worry has to dominate your life. Faith in action also encourages others. When people see you stepping out in trust while facing fear, it inspires them to trust God in their own lives. Craig often reminds leaders and viewers alike that our obedience has ripple effects. The courage you exhibit becomes a beacon of hope and faith for others, demonstrating that worry does not have to dictate life's decisions. In this way, faith in action is both personal and communal. It strengthens your own trust and influences those around you. In essence, obedience despite fear transforms worry into opportunity. It replaces anxiety with confidence, hesitation with movement, and doubt with trust. Each step of faith, no matter how small, is a declaration: God is bigger than my fear, stronger than my anxiety, and faithful to guide me through the uncertainty. When you practice faith in action, you begin to live a life defined not by worry, but by courage, trust, and hope, and the cycle of fear that once dominated your thoughts begins to break. There is a profound difference between knowing about God and truly believing that God has you. Worry often comes from the lie that we are alone in the challenges we face, that the weight of life rests solely on our shoulders. Craig Groeschel frequently emphasizes that anxiety is rooted in forgetting God's presence, forgetting His faithfulness, and forgetting that He is intimately involved in every detail of our lives. Reassurance is not merely a comforting thought. It is a spiritual reality that transforms the way we live, act, and respond to life's uncertainties. God's got you. He has always had you, and He will never let you go. When life feels overwhelming, it is easy to focus on what is wrong, what could go wrong, or what might never work out. The human tendency is to magnify problems and minimize God. Worry thrives when we lose sight of God's ability to manage circumstances far beyond our control. But the truth is that God's perspective is not limited by time, space, or human understanding. He sees the beginning and the end, the potential and the pitfalls, the paths you cannot see. His sovereignty assures us that no matter how chaotic or uncertain life appears, nothing escapes His notice or His care. Reassurance begins with remembering who God is. He is our creator, the one who made the heavens and the earth, the one who holds every star in place. He is our shepherd, guiding us through valleys of fear, providing for our needs, and protecting us from unseen dangers. He is our Father, deeply invested in our well-being, intimately aware of our struggles, and deeply moved by our prayers. Craig often illustrates that when we anchor our hearts in the identity of God rather than the intensity of our circumstances, worry begins to lose its grip and confidence begins to grow. Understanding God's faithfulness also brings reassurance. Look back on your life and reflect on the moments when God came through, when He provided, protected, and guided you. Perhaps there were situations where you thought all hope was lost, yet doors opened unexpectedly, solutions appeared, or peace emerged in impossible circumstances. These experiences are not coincidences. They are evidence of God's ongoing commitment to you. Each answered prayer, each moment of provision, each time you survived when you thought you wouldn't, reinforces the truth that God has always had you and always will. Reassurance is also cultivated through surrender. To hand over our anxiety to God, we must release the illusion that we can control everything. Craig Groeschel frequently reminds audiences that the moment we stop trying to manipulate outcomes, schedule perfection, and micromanage life is the moment we begin to experience freedom. Surrender is not passive resignation, it is active trust. It is choosing to believe that God is competent, faithful, and fully capable of handling the circumstances that intimidate or overwhelm us. When we surrender, worry loses its foothold because the responsibility shifts from us to God and our hearts are able to rest. Prayer is a critical practice for reinforcing reassurance. When worry arises, turning to God in prayer is more than a request for intervention. It is an acknowledgement that He is in control. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us to present our requests to God with thanksgiving. This act of thanksgiving, even in the midst of uncertainty, reminds our hearts of God's past faithfulness and strengthens our trust that He is capable of managing the present and the future. Prayer is a tangible way to experience the reality that God is holding every detail of our lives in his hands. Another key to reassurance is perspective. Worry focuses on what we cannot see, what we cannot predict, and what we fear might happen. God sees all things clearly and operates according to his perfect plan. When you align your perspective with God's, even temporarily, the weight of worry diminishes. You begin to see problems, not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for God to demonstrate his faithfulness, power, and love. Craig often emphasizes that perspective changes everything because it shifts your focus from fear to trust, from doubt to confidence, and from isolation to intimacy with God. Reassurance also grows through action rooted in faith. When you take steps of obedience, even when afraid, you are demonstrating your trust in God. Each step of faith reinforces the reality that God is guiding, protecting, and providing. As you act in alignment with his purposes, the evidence of his presence becomes more apparent, strengthening your confidence that he has you in every situation. Faith and action together become the antidote to worry, a living proof that God is not distant, but actively involved in your life. Finally, reassurance is strengthened by community. Sharing your fears, your struggles, and your trust journey with others who also believe in God's faithfulness reinforces the truth that God has you. When you witness his work in the lives of others, it builds your confidence that he is fully capable of handling your life as well. Craig often reminds his audience that no one should walk in worry alone. Encouragement, prayer, and witness from others help solidify the reality that God's presence is steadfast and his care is unwavering. Reassurance is a daily choice, is a conscious decision to remind yourself that God has never abandoned you, that he is bigger than your problems, and that he is working behind the scenes even when you cannot see it. When you consistently choose to trust, surrender, pray, and act in faith, your heart begins to internalize the truth. God's got you. Nothing can separate you from his care. Nothing can outmaneuver his power, and nothing can outpace his plan. This is the foundation for a life free from the paralyzing grip of worry, a life marked by confidence, courage, and unwavering trust in the one who holds all things in his hands. As we bring this message together, remember this simple yet life-changing truth: worry was never meant to be your burden. God is sovereign, God is faithful, and God is fully capable of handling everything in your life. You do not have to carry the weight of uncertainty, fear, or anxiety on your own. Every worry you've held, every sleepless night, every anxious thought, God has already seen it, already knows it, and already has a plan to work it out for your good. Faith is not a feeling, it is a choice. It is choosing to trust God when circumstances feel overwhelming, to step forward in obedience even when fear whispers you can't, and to release control of outcomes into the hands of a loving, all-powerful Father. Living in God's peace does not mean your life will be problem-free. But it does mean your heart can rest, your mind can be steady, and your spirit can thrive in the assurance that he has got it all under control. So today, decide to stop carrying what was never meant for you to carry. Hand over your worries, fears, and uncertainties to God. Speak his promises aloud. Take the next step in faith. Trust him for the things you cannot see. And thank him for the ways he is already at work behind the scenes. Let his presence calm your storm. Let his sovereignty reassure your heart, and let his peace guard your mind. No matter what comes your way, remember, God's got it. He has you, he sees you, and he is working all things together for your good. Your responsibility is not to control the outcome, but to trust the one who holds the outcome in his hands. Walk forward today with confidence, courage, and the unshakable peace that comes from knowing that the creator of the universe is personally watching over your life. Stop worrying, start trusting. God's got it.